And there's plenty of room up front, so I encourage you to move forward, if you will. It's a special eve of Passover talk today. So let me introduce to you today our speaker, who's Deborah McKoy. And you can see her title up here.
I don't have it, sorry.
Oh, that's not, that's fine. And, here we go. So Deb's actually a graduate of the School of Education here at Berkeley in the poem element, right? Mm-hmm. And before that, she got a master's degree at Columbia, and that was in public policy and administration. And her specialization here at Berkeley, or here in the School of Ed, was urban planning within education policy and such. And she has quite a varied history. I think I first met Deb when we were on the service learning committee.
Oh, wow.
I think.
Yeah.
And we had various fun interactions there and after. Yeah. I think Fred calling you on?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. And she's actually in her past, she was chief. She has various past work. Chief of Economic Development of the New York City Housing Authority. That won't be what she'll be talking about today. But perhaps more cool is that she's founder and executive director of UC Berkeley Center for Cities and Schools. And she also teaches in the Department of City and Regional Planning. And you'll see a lot of themes in her work that I think we'll see in her talk today. A couple relating housing, community development, how young people play roles in the metropolitan change and transformation, and this sort of nexus of housing, transportation, and education with city and regional planning, and also something near and dear to my heart from the climate change-ish orientation and sustainable communities and so forth. So without further ado, let me introduce Deb McKoy, who will be chatting about creating trajectories of opportunity for young people across the nation and globe.
Great, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here, and thank you for inviting me. It's also just really fun to be on this campus again, on Tolman Hall. I spent many, many years here, and a lot of what I'll talk about actually is how so much of the inspiration for the work that we do at the center, particularly in YCRAN, but really all aspects of our work, we're really grounded very much here with many of the amazing researchers and theoreticians here at Berkeley. So I won't just dwell on that or focus on that too much, but we really want to kind of say thank you and really recognize the role that Berkeley has played and Tolman has played in our thinking at the center again and elsewhere in our work. The timing is also really nice to give this talk. In September, amazingly, it will be 10 years since we started the Center for Cities and Schools. And I'll talk very briefly about it when I introduce the Y plan, but there's something that's sort of an interesting fact. It's not really a metaphor, but it uses geography to explain something between education and city planning, which I think is actually something pretty important, and hopefully something we're trying to change in conversations like this. So how many people have ever been to the College of Environmental Design? Oh, a couple, great. Sorry, my friends. Well, as you know, Worcester Hall is on the opposite side of this campus, right? You have Tolman here, and you have Worcester all the way on the, I'm gonna get this wrong, the southeast quadrant, right? Okay.
They're both beautiful buildings.
Oh, yeah.
And they're probably the two ugliest buildings on campus, most importantly, even though it's an award-winning architecture building, but that history we'll talk another time. But what's important, though, is that it really reflects the separation between between learning and where we learn. And that I think what we're really trying to do, and we were very intentional about locating the center in the Department of City Planning in this larger college, to really try to reintegrate learning within everyday life and within the built environment. I know a lot of folks here are math, science, technology folks. My friends used to be all on cog science development. I worked much more in social theory and policy work, so hopefully, but I'm very inspired by a lot of the cog scientists here as well, so I'm looking forward to kind of having a conversation, and please challenge us in some of our assumptions as well as we move forward. So anyhow, so with that framing, the center is really trying to bring these worlds together. As we approach our 10th anniversary, what we really want to do is unite our research even more and deeper in learning more about what you're doing and how the built environment, how the places that we live, learn, love, and play can really be more integrated into the schools that we work in, the places we learn. Very quickly, the overview of my talk today. And someone keeping time, I guess I could keep time myself, there's a clock. I'm going to try to keep my talk to maybe 30 or 40 minutes. I really want to hope to engage in some dialogue with you all on our work today. So first, a quick overview of what is Y-Plan. How many people have heard of Y-Plan? Okay, great. I guess that's why you've come to the talk too. A little bit about our methodology and our theoretical foundation. Snapshots across the nation and globe to give you a sense of what some of these community development projects are happening. And then go deeper into one of the case studies that we're working on right now to illustrate some of the insight and some of the data that we're starting to collect. And share a little bit about our research strategy going forward. We're just about concluding a kind of first formative year of this national initiative, so it's kind of a perfect time to really vet some of our research strategies and get your insight. I'd love to kind of hopefully turn this into more of a workshop dialogue as well as we move forward. So, Y-Plan, we like to say it turns schools inside out, where the community becomes the text for learning, and young people become true agents of social change. It describes an acronym, and in academics we love acronyms. It stands for youth, plan, learn, act now. And each of one of those words are actually pretty intentional about part of the curriculum or methodology. But it's also equally or more importantly a pun. It really asks us and asks young people to engage in this process of why, right? Why do we plan, both for the cities that we live in, but equally or more importantly, why and how do we plan for ourselves? For our own life trajectory. And how do those two not stand apart, but mutually reinforce each other? So how does the engagement of improving our worlds and our cities that we live in also really support young people's college and career readiness trajectories? So the pun is important, and we'll keep coming back to this notion of why, and engaging young people in inquiry. And similarly, engaging adults in why do you need to plan with young people, right? So inquiry is very much at the foundation of our work. It's an educational methodology focused on engaging young people, as I said, as agents of change, but it's also about working with adults, teachers and city leaders and civic leaders who also need to learn how to work with young people. A lot of what we find in community development or youth development strategies is that adults, we've got lots of opinions about what young people should do or how they should do it, but we don't really prepare adults how to work with young people. In city planning, there are not a lot of courses on schools, and I probably have taught the one for about a decade that even touches on schools or educational methodology. There might be a unit in some classes, but that's probably about it. So again, it's about engaging and preparing young people to engage in cities in critical ways in placemaking, but it's also about helping adults learn how to do that in and outside of school. A key part of the definition of Y-Plan, and then I'll turn to a little bit around the mission of our center, is that the projects that young people work on are real community development projects, right? So they can't just be a simulation. And the reason of that, and the reason it led to the mission of the center's work, is that we really want to position high quality education as not a nice thing to do when you're planning for cities, but a really critical component of how we understand cities. And how do we want to create cities that are equitable, sustainable, and healthy for all young people. Engaging in project-based learning for adults, we know we want to try to get kids to do that in schools, right? But we have found that engaging adults in project-based learning with young people is one of the most impactful and effective ways of creating collaborative change in these types of community development projects that can have and lead to sustainable results. As I mentioned when I started, I'm going to talk really briefly about the center because I could probably spend another 3 hours just talking about the center's work at large. But it was really started here. I worked in community development, largely in New York. I'm a New Yorker. I worked in housing, in public housing for many years. I've worked for the Department of U.S. and Housing Urban Development for many years now, starting in New York. And what was always missing when we were trying to develop communities and economic development is young people and schools. They were the one sector that were never a part of how we thought about community development. So my work in New York as Chief of Economic Development and Training, or whatever my title was, really led me to study education. I never thought I would. I never thought I would want to study schools. I never particularly liked school myself. I felt that they were pretty difficult institutions to succeed in. But when I was, in the communities and trying to figure out how young people, how all families can succeed, I just really felt we were always doing too little too late. And if we didn't start earlier on in the pipeline and really try to structure success before young people got out there or didn't get out successfully from school, we weren't going to be able to change the status quo of the communities. So I came to Coleman Hall to study education policy, and to particularly, it was home of the National Center for Research in Vocational Education, and that's where I did my work for 6 years. I'll talk a little bit more about David Stern and the work there that really inspired much of the center's work, the Y Plan methodology as well. But the center, it's 10 years in September, and it's really, we do a lot of interdisciplinary work between how the built environment and education interrelate. Really trying to make schools part of the built environment. Education, I won't get into a land use analysis right now, but amazingly, schools are often some of the largest land use actors in a city or a community. And guess who are never at the table when you're thinking about new plans for a city? Schools, right? We've created a system led by school boards and a notion historically to protect schools, but we know it's far too often led to isolating schools. So at the center, we're really trying to break down that isolation, break through the silos of policymaking between city planners, urban designers, and educators, and really try to integrate the environments so that young people can live, learn, and be successful. Again, we can talk lots more in the Q&A around the center's work. I'll conclude this part just by briefly saying that the Y Plan is truly the heartbeat of our work. It keeps us very grounded in young people's needs. And that if policymaking isn't focused on how young people need, what young people need from cities, we're never going to succeed in any of the city policies that we create. So, since I've been sitting here at Tolman Hall, the Y Plan has expanded exponentially. It's very exciting, and I would dare say very humbling, as we're now entering more of a research phase of trying to understand and document, if you will. So what? What are young people learning and what are adults learning in the process? I'll briefly explain this growth. It started as a class that I agreed to teach when I was doing my dissertation here, as many of I'm sure you are doing right now. I was desperate to get out of the library and do something practical and engaging with communities. And so I was invited to kind of create a class where young people could be involved in project-based learning that was building off of kind of a history of city planners working in local schools, sometimes successfully, not so successfully other times. And in teaching this class and writing my dissertation at the same time, it became really clear to me that we needed more formal processes where young people are really a key part of how we think about changing cities. And equally important, when we think about urban education, we have to have a much better sense of what urban means. What does place mean? Right? How do we kind of deconstruct what places are, what's happening in them, what's driving the inequality before we try to fix the inequality inside of schools, right? So how do you, in a sense, you get ahead of the problems and the crises that teachers and workers in schools and really try to create and structure the conditions for learning, the conditions that structure success for all young people to succeed. So back to the Y Plan, sorry. So the Y Plan, when I started teaching it almost 12 years ago now, it was a class that I taught, and we started working with local community development projects. It has since that time grown as more and more folks around the country were kind of hungry for some infrastructure, some real formal way to engage in community development and connect young people to changing the places that they live in. Today, it is in over 9 cities. We sort of say 10 sometimes when Bronx and Queens don't like to be considered the same city in New York. But it's over 9 cities. Last year, over 1,000 young people went through Y Plan in these 9 cities. It has also grown globally through a global partnership with an international nonprofit called USA, where we are in Japan, Indonesia, and Sub-Saharan Africa. And a lot of that is run through summer studios. So there's been a lot of growth. This methodology that's really grounded in a lot of research that I'll talk about here has really, I think, struck a chord with what folks are hungry for moving forward. Largely making it doable, right? Making it doable for young people to connect. So let me briefly go over the methodology that we use. Hopefully it's familiar. It's really aligned to the scientific method. It's also closely aligned to how we teach city planning, or particularly participatory planning in the Department of City Planning. And you'll see a lot of the crossover. But I think what's very important is it's grounded in professional practice. It's not grounded in the notion of creating an educational activity, right? So everything about it is very much grounded in the practice, the profession of city planning, of good city planning, I should say. So it's a 5-step process. It starts with, and I wanted to share with you, if I can click it on, and I have our awesome, did I do this right? Ah, no, that's not right. I'm trying to get our website up, and I'm looking at John here, who actually is helping advise and build our website. You should always practice the technology before you start it. Sorry, you know what? I don't think I can pull up the website.
It looked like it where you just have to maximize your browser. Let's go ahead and click on it.
You think I can?
Yeah.
The link?
You can do it.
It's not working.
Yep, there we go.
And hit the green
God,
button at the
see?
top there of the browser. The little green one.
Green circle.
There you go. Yeah.
Thank God there are awesome technology people in the room. I am not one of them. Okay, so one of the things that we've done to make the Y-Plan process accessible across these cities and nations is to create a digital toolkit and a website that's really trying to make public a lot of the thinking that goes into the Y-Plan process. There's a lot of wonderful information on here. It's about preparing cities and teachers, the readiness to work together. But to show you a little bit about the process, I thought I'd show you what we call the road test, which are these illustrating these 5 steps. So the first step is startup. You see that?
I think you're zoomed in on.
All right, John, what do I do?
Hit command minus.
Plus.
Like you're just minus. There you go.
There we go.
Yeah.
See, it's teamwork. We teach a lot about teamwork in this work. Okay. So module 1 is step 1 about really cultivating client, really identifying that authentic project. The project has to matter to someone, and someone has to be able to act on the young people's ideas. So the client is really important. It's not just an adult with a good idea or a community project they'd like to happen. It really has to be an authentic project where decisions matter, and young people's ideas could have consequences. It doesn't mean that adults don't have to take their ideas, of course, but the possibility of authenticity has to be there. So step 1 is participants define the project question in partnership with adult allies and develop the essential relationships. Phase 2 is making sense of the city. This is the research part, going out and collecting raw data. Again, going out and analyzing the community, finding out the data that is needed to both understand the problem better and begin to think about innovative solutions. It's also something we call about place memory, which is an urban planning framing from Dolores Hayden, who's a pretty amazing historian of urban planning. And it's about really recognizing that individuals have such memory of place, but we don't really utilize their identity and memory and impressions of a place. We work from assumptions about what other people think about those places. So in the second phase, making sense of the city, it really is honoring every individual's experience and connection to the places that they're being asked to investigate. Yeah.
I know you're going to give examples later, but can you give us like a quick example to sort of put this into context? Like, are you planning a park, or what are you planning?
Sure. So last Thursday, there are 3 Y-Plan projects going on right now. And last Thursday was West Oakland's Y-Plan project at McClymonds High School. I actually haven't been at McClymonds in over 6 years. And they were working on the West Oakland redevelopment plan, which is really trying to come up with a new economic development vision for West Oakland. Young people's client was a senior city manager, a city planner for Oakland, who posed this issue of gateways. That the gateways is a big issue around the redevelopment of West Oakland because a lot of the assumptions of what happens there, more importantly, who the people are there. And she really wanted to understand from young people, how do you perceive West Oakland, and how do you want to be perceived in West Oakland? So the young people did the mapping. They went out and really kind of cataloged what they see, the trash, the garbage. Well, one kid said that was so painful. We think about this in healthy cities and like a healthy community. What would make it healthier? Not having a dead cat at my door, in the school door, right? Very fundamental things that are awful to think about, but is their everyday experience. That's an example of the Y Plan project. I'm going to go a little quicker through this process, and then I'll give you some more illustrations. Great, thank you. I'm happy with questions if they come up, and we'll have more time for dialogue as well. Okay, third phase, into action. It's also what we call the charrette time in design speak. It's brainstorming. It's really coming up with new ideas, taking the data that you collected, and coming up with new ideas, innovative solutions that can become proposals for city change. Going public, the next phase is really important. We say lots of people have ideas, but if you don't have the skills or confidence or space to share those ideas, to go public with them, they stay ideas. They don't become change. And we're very much about trying to help young people create change in their communities and in their own lives. So going public, when it started, it was just a final presentation at City Hall. Now, with the advent of digital technology, and John is helping to advise us on creating a digital space where young people can go public on the web and share the different projects across the nation and globe. Looking forward, looking back, of course, it's critical to reflect on these lessons, and we'll talk about the double bottom line of Y Plan, not only looking at yourself and your college and career readiness, but sustained engagement in community. So the Y Plan project should really be the beginning, a taste for engagement. It shouldn't end there. So stage 5 is super important, as you guys know as educators. So now I'm going to try to go back to the PowerPoint. There are lots of resources here. This is our toolkit. I'll talk a little bit more at this end. I just wanted to pull up that there are lots of resources available on the website if you want to know more about our methodology and strategy moving forward. Okay. Look at that, I managed to get back to the presentation. Okay. So as I mentioned briefly, there's a double bottom line of Y Plan, and that's what we're trying to investigate in terms of understanding outcomes. It is both about college and career readiness and preparation. Again, I was very influenced here by school to work days or school to career days, and the importance of really shaking up traditional notions of vocational education to engage hands-on or experiential learning related to communities and related to industry for young people to make connections to what they live, work, and do. The other side of the bottom line is the urban planning side, the community development side, and it's equally as important to build healthy, sustainable, and joyful communities. It used to be equitable, and we talk about the center, we talk about equitable, but some colleagues, Pedro Nagata being one of them, who I had here as a professor years ago, is still a partner in the work, talks about the need of dignity and joy for young people, and so we think it's an important part of the framing, because it's a fun thing to think about, right? I want a joyful place, and young people get really engaged when you think about that. So that's the double bottom line. I briefly, as I mentioned, want to talk about some of the local influences on this work and some of the broad literature that's influenced this thinking greatly. Jean Lave was one of my first professors here at Berkeley. She remains one of my greatest sources of inspiration, whether it was here in class or playing poker down somewhere in Berkeley. I mean, Jean's whole notion of legitimate peripheral participation, of course, Lave and Wenger and all the work that's come from that, within situated learning, was so profound to me and my friends when we started understanding the political nature of learning, and that if you don't have access to people and resources and authentic aspects of life, then learning may not happen, right? So it's very political if you don't have access, and that made sense to me. I did all the study theory, I was learning all that different theory when I started working here and thinking of going to school here and thinking about different policies. But it was understanding the political nature of learning that really was transformative to my understanding about how our systems have to change. So, and of course Dewey was also very influential in this thinking as well. But that notion of legitimate peripheral participation in a community of practice is one of the greatest foundations for the work of Y Plan. David Stern, Norton Grubb were also equally influential in my work. David Stern continues to be one of my greatest friends, allies, mentors in this work. He's very much a part of the National Y Plan Research Strategy. Again, I'm sorry he's preparing for Passover dinner tonight, or he would be here, I hope, I trust. But again, I think what David and Norton, many of the faculty here were able to do is really to take on the inequity in our tracking system and really try to say that the schools and curriculum has got to change and not be as inequitable through tracking, and that workplaces, work-based learning can be transformative for young people. It doesn't have to be rendered third class. It doesn't have to limit young people's expectations. So again, you'll see a lot of the school to career influence in this work. More recently, hanging out a lot in city planning, participatory planning has been very influential in this work. Judy Innes and others who really recognize placemaking as a very powerful dimension of creating cities that young people need to be a part of. A little bit around more recent, kind of a fast forward 6 6 or 7 years. It's also the title of today's talk, Trajectories of Opportunity. I'm just really curious about how many folks have heard of both of these schools of thinking or these framing, because one is very grounded in education today, the opportunity gap, and the other is very grounded in urban planning. So who here knows about the opportunity gap and thinks and works a lot in that? Some. Okay, I thought it was everybody. Geographies of opportunity. Okay, so as you might guess, opportunity gap, we're trying to close the opportunity gap, is what a lot of education policy folks are trying to do today, to shift the notion from achievement gap, which is really results-oriented and test-based, to input, or what are the opportunities that young people have access to that can lead to successful outcomes. That's a very important shift in how we think about young people's ability to achieve anything inside of school and in their lives, right? So it's shifting from the achievement gap, which is output focused, to inputs of what are the opportunities that young people have access to that create the conditions to make learning possible. In the urban planning world, geographies of opportunity are really saying that we have so much evidence that the zip codes where we live predetermines our academic outcomes, our health outcomes, our employment outcomes. Place is so important, yet it's often never really considered in how we make public policies. So we really need to understand the geographic understanding of where inequity lies. So at the center, what we've done, it was actually for a book chapter for public health, folks in the public health department and Warren Institute of Law School, where we pulled together these theories and really thought about engaging young people in the built environment like Y Plan. It's really about engaging them in creating trajectories of opportunity. Again, trajectory went back to a lot of Jean Lave and situated learning, that identity is at the core of our learning, and that you have to think about it not as a moment in time, but over time, right? So what is access to opportunity over time? How does the built environment and the cities that you live in structure success or failure for young people, right? And engaging young people in that process is a way of better understanding how to change the status quo in many circumstances and improve the cities to improve young people's life outcomes and academic outcomes as well. So that's the title of our talk. It just took me 25 minutes to get to the title. But it's a very important framing because it's about not a moment in time, it's about really thinking about across a lifetime. Now for the snapshots. Okay. Really, I'll give you a couple of examples here in the US, and then a couple of examples of some of the global projects in Japan, Indonesia, and then we'll get a little bit more into some of the case study work today. In Queens, New York, this year, and these are also projects from this year, a lot of this work is grounded in career academies. How many people work at all career academies, small learning communities? Okay, it's a different world from my policy work. It's basically trying to reorganize schools around learning themes. And really trying to say that it's building on the best of vocational education and school to work and school to career research that I mentioned before, to create contextual opportunities where young people maybe study different topics or different subject matter, like through health or through technology or some theme that they can help connect the dots in their work, in their curriculum. So this is based in an IT academy, and a teacher who used to teach science and also teaches IT, has been a fellow with Y Plan for over a year and a half now. And Andrew in Queens started partnering with the Center for Hearing Communication. And what was really powerful about this is the young people developed apps for families with hearing impairments or individual hearing impairments to navigate the city better. And what was really humbling, it was at the first time that a Y Plan project dealt with special needs. So it was also humbling and kind of inspiring in how important it is to really think about all users of cities and space. The apps that Jessie Stewart here is a research specialist with the center, and when we went to see the final presentation, it was so amazing to have the young people. They grappled with the technology, but they also really grappled with the issue, right? It was illuminating to think, what does it mean if a mother can't hear their child crying in the park? What does it mean if you're driving and a father can't hear their child in the back seat, right? So they developed apps that could try to simulate the crying so parents could hear it. It was really, so again, it was the social experience, the social insight that they gained in doing this work that was as important as the actual technology that they created. And really thinking about cities and how we have to navigate cities for all users. in the Bronx project right now, and they're working with LISC, which is the large community development intermediary nationally, on a large community development project. It's the Academy of Language and Technology. It's situated after school. This program, it's largely in school, but sometimes when their teachers are starting, it's an after school class as well. And these young people are accessing healthy food for immigrant communities in the Mott Haven community in a federally funded initiative called Choice Neighborhoods. Again, young people are going out and mapping out the lack of access to healthy food, how far they have to go during school or after school on the weekends to actually get healthy food, which is, of course, much more expensive for young people and families in these communities. Washington, D.C., a charter school network called the Cesar Chavez Charter School has adopted Y-Plan across its 4 schools, 2 middle schools and 2 high schools. The academic fit is a broad range of academic curriculum, including geography, physics, and art. It's also connected to a large community development strategy that's funded by the Department of Education. Promise Neighborhoods is a large federal national strategy to really try to create comprehensive services and to really try to align services in partnership with local schools. It was a commitment that President Obama started. It was inspired by work down in New York called the Harlem Children's Zone, really thinking about you have to think of all the needs of young people to succeed in school. So they're their client, and they're taking out a range of projects from public art as a tool to bridge 2 communities. Literally, the community development project is a physical bridge that divides these communities. So young people are using art to create greater relationships between these communities and transform the future of these worlds. A solar energy park, farmers market, and assessing and creating equitable access to technology. In fact, right now we're doing a short video. So next time I see you, we'll have a video to show you, to have the young people tell you more about the Y-Plan directly about this work. But that'll actually be ready at the end of May. So if you're interested, stay tuned. It'll be on our website. A little snapshot from global Y-Plan. 3 years ago, we were invited by an international global organization called IUSA to partner with them to work with. The first year was 300, kind of crazy for a startup year. Last year was 100, which seemed much more tame. To bring young people from Tohoku, Japan, which is the region where the tsunami hit, to learn about community development so they could go back and be greater actors of change in rebuilding the Tohoku region. It was hit not only by the tsunami, but of course the nuclear meltdown that happened as a result of it. I don't think I've had such a humbling experience as working with many of these young people. What we believe in is the studio experience. That's very much how we teach urban planning or urban design. So young people come here for 3 weeks. They're coming this summer. If you're interested, let us know. We would love to have more folks interact with these young folks. We have translators. If you don't speak Japanese, not a problem. And so they go through a 2-week studio. And the client was Mayor Tom Bates, and Telegraph Avenue, which is one of his commitments to transform. It's certainly gone down in quality because of fire and other kind of common things in urban core, not so common in Berkeley. But Tom said, I wonder how they feel, how they think the Telegraph Avenue should be more inviting to folks. What kind of economic development do they as tourists, right, as visitors, feel should happen here? So the question was redeveloping Telegraph Avenue, and with mentorship of city planners and going through the Y-Plan methodology, young people came up with a studio for Telegraph Avenue. Clearly they're not long-term investors in Telegraph, but what we've learned in the international work is to use that studio experience and glean from it the core skills of city planning or community development, and then they're able now to apply that to action at home. So the last week, it's a 3-week process. The first 2 weeks are, a studio, a real-world studio project, and then they think about how to utilize those skills back for Tohoku, Japan. One of the projects that our partners in Japan are very proud of is a group of young people created a van business for ecotourism because they felt that what was happening in Tohoku was invisible and that people didn't want to really acknowledge how bad off things still are in Tohoku. So we created a shuttle business working with a local tourist company, bringing folks from Tokyo to Tohoku to see not just the problems, to see the good stuff, that folks are really trying to engage in transforming Tohoku for the future, but very much wanted to be visible. And I think that notion of being visible and being active in communities is central to Y-Plan young people, whether you're in Brooklyn or Queens or Berkeley or Tohoku, Japan. And we hope in some of the Y plan processes they're able to do that. In Asia, over in Indonesia, in Bandung, Indonesia, a woman, actually this wasn't part of a partnership, but a woman at MIT had heard about Y plan and said, I'm an urban designer. I'm so eager to get young people engaged in really revitalizing many of the low-income communities in Bandung, which is the 3rd largest city in Indonesia. Can I please come and learn about Y plan? And we were doing a summer training, and we're like, sure. Part of the problem with growth is you're so excited when people want to do this work that you say yes to everybody. So we're like, okay, come and get trained. But amazingly, the mayor of Bandung is an alumni of the College of Environmental Design, is an architect, and has now served as the client for Bandung Y plan, and has proposed questions to young people to engage in. The question that they're working on right now is flooding and water control in public spaces, and particularly the effect that has on young people. So it's really exciting to see the wide range of projects, and how young people are experiencing it. I'll talk about this at the end. On May 18th and 19th, it's about a month away, we're having a national and a global summit where all the young people, teachers, and civic partners that could come are meeting in Washington to share their experiences, to share what's working, what's not working, and to really build on a community of practice globally, right? So how do you create a fellowship of folks trying to resist a lot of the structures that say this isn't really possible? And how are you learning how to engage and resist some of the forces that don't allow young people to be engaged in change? So you're all welcome. It's public. If you happen to be in Washington May 18th, come join us. Actually, before I go there, what I want to do, it's 10 to 5. We go till when? So we have about
5:10 or so, and then
5:10.
questions until 5:30.
Okay. I just want to break this up a little bit before we get into the case study and ask you to turn to your neighbor and just think about if there was one experience you've had engaging in community development or a community action project. So who was involved and what did you learn? What did you take away from the experience? So just 2 minutes, really quick, pair share if you will. Just turn to your neighbor. Again, have you been involved in a community development project? And what did you learn? Who would like to share a project that they worked on and something that they learned from the process? There's a lot of talking going on. Someone can share. Yes, Mike?
Well, this is the closest thing that I have to community development, is trying to get the global community to understand climate change. But it's very different from like the local or regional city kind of thing. You know, it's a kind of direct community action where, you know, the individuals can be wherever. Like we have, Lee knows this, I think we have about 200 different countries and 4,000 cities where people are logging on, but it's a lot different
It's like a
from...
larger community than what you're talking
Yeah, it's not like the community organizing that like Obama was involved in or anything like that.
So you're targeting everybody, right?
7 billion.
7 billion people,
Yeah,
that's great.
We're hoping for 7 billion unique visitors.
So, I mean, when you think about a community of practice, though, about what does it go in to educate around climate change, right? It is super important to have folks who are educated about what climate change is. It becomes a buzzword so that no one really identifies with it. And so what I was so impressed with that, and where I think it goes back to Y-Plan, is that it's a project that really matters, right? So it's a project that has that should have core relevance to every individual, right? And touches how you experience the cities you live in. But in order to do that, you need to understand the process. So you created a product that directly addressed that problem, right? So you know, the connections are there, the meaning making that's essential for a project like that, which is great.
Yeah. We've also started trying to open it up to, like, we have lots of comment sections on the website, and really have been accepting a lot of comments and reading those and trying to make sense of them, and that's sort of taking input from the community and trying to adapt. And one of the things that we always remark upon is how there are so much contradictory advice that comes in. You know, you get one email that says, "Oh, your video is too long," and then one that says it's too short, or, you know, too much detail, not enough detail, and, or "I love this part," and this another person says, "Well, get rid of it." So I'm sure that.
And we also are translating into various languages. Like we have full-on Chinese or Mandarin videos. We've got translations in German, Thai, Spanish, Russian, others going on. And a lot of times you can tell what the community is by seeing who's logging on. Like if they're from cities or countries that are about to be inundated by sea level rise, like maybe the Maldives or something like that, or if they're, you know, sort of more Scandinavian countries worried about the Norwegian is not selling out oil or something like that.
Yeah, a key piece that you're talking about is reciprocity. So that's one of the core elements of Y-Plan. It's that you're not just about telling information, you're trying to learn as well. That notion of reciprocity is huge to Authentic Project. So it's great. I'm looking forward to tapping into your videos and adding it to our website, because a lot of young people are engaged in sustainable projects, right? So those are all tools that we can kind of continue to learn from and with. So I think it's a terrific project. One other person who wants to share a community project very briefly? Yes.
Well, this is not as positive a story, but it sends home the message what can go wrong. And I'm student teaching in a middle school at the 8th grade level, and they are trying to do a community practice once a month of healthy eating.
Yeah.
But they're giving the students very little ownership of the process. So in talking to students, interviewing students, they said we have no voice.
Yeah.
And so I think that's one of the reasons why it's failing.
That is a perfect example of 95% of the types of youth engagement projects that happen. That they make adults feel good, you get to check off a list, and there's not a lot of authenticity in the question and work.
Yeah, and I tried to talk to a few adults, but not receptive.
Right. Well, we'd love to talk to you if you want, if you're involved in trying to make it better. Yes, Sarah.
I just had a question about ownership. This is something I've been thinking about for a long time now. And like, for this apprenticeship model where the client is giving young people an authentic question, like in the ideal case, how much apprenticeship are they providing to young people? And like how much interaction, that kind of thing?
So that is a great question and a really important thing we're grappling with, being national. I think we took for granted how much support we provided in terms of professional expertise here in the Bay Area, where we call up, hey, Joe the planner, right? Can you go out and connect the dots on people that could come out and kind of that community of practice way and really share their expertise. We're learning it's one of the #1 challenge that folks in New York and New Orleans and Dallas and Washington are facing is the difficulty working with civic partners. I think coming from city work, you take for granted that so many city leaders want to work with young people. So I would say it's incredibly important, and we're trying to figure out how to make it easier. One thing is a technology tool that some of our students are working with YPlan to try to create kind of like a match.com, for lack of a better word, between city planners or city leaders with a problem and young people, so that there can be more understanding about the problems that get provided, but then also resources. So teachers can't be urban planners, right? So the toolkit was one resource to really try to provide kind of 101 on what is city planning for that purpose. But even digital information can't replace the one-on-one contact. So we really are trying to build out the Adult Ally Network to get more expertise engaged in the local YPlan projects. And in Indonesia, it was really important because it came from urban designers. So they're trying to figure out how to work in schools. So they came with that expertise, but need more help from teachers. Jesse, do you want to say
I just
anything?
want to jump in because I really think that this notion of authenticity and apprenticeship they're totally interrelated in the sense that what we're finding is when the projects are authentic and there is that reciprocal kind of buy-in or the client has a real stake for student feedback. If there's that willingness and that desire to be real mentors to the students and like really guide the process, and we saw that in Richmond with this case study that we're going to talk about. So.
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to spend our last 10 minutes talking about in-depth on a case study, but it's critical, Sarah, because that's what makes these projects hard to do, right? We have to make it easier to access that level of expertise. So really briefly, I want to go over a little bit more in depth about one project and talk about these issues of reciprocity, of authenticity, and of access to expertise. Also vet with you, if you will, some of the data that we're starting to collect as we try to document the outcomes for young people and adult allies. So this is Richmond, California. I'm sure you've driven by it or have spent any time in it. Has anyone been in Richmond, California? A little bit. Oh, a little bit. Okay, so some live there. And a lot of people live in Port Richmond. We've been working with Richmond High and Kennedy High School for over 5 years. The city manager has become one of the greatest champions of YPlan, and not because he doesn't have a lot to do. Bill Lindsay is a very busy guy, the city manager of Richmond. What's been so exciting is that Bill has really changed his own way of doing planning, recognizing how much he benefits by engaging with young people over these 5 years. So I'm going to describe a recent transportation project. Who thought that would be really sexy to young people, right? Where we put out a transportation project and how that's grown in terms of both for the city and for the young people. Working specifically in Berkeley High, I also want to recognize UC Links that has supported the work in the Bay Area for a long time, which supports classes here on campus that go out and work in community and do kind of local research with communities. So the academic fit, we've worked with 10th and 12th grade world history students and classes for the past 5 years. The client was the city of Richmond, particularly the city manager, although the mayor comes to every final event to see the young people, as does the superintendent of West Compton. The project that we're focusing on here, as we do in our research analysis, is creating access and connectivity to Richmond's South Shoreline for all residents. There's a lot of new development. There's actually going to be a new Lawrence Berkeley lab in Richmond, which has gotten a lot of attention. Bill's very proud of having won that bid, that competition to bring a new lab into Richmond. But guess what was never involved or never added into the application process? K-12 education. Yeah, right. What's more exciting than a new research lab? We got some scientists in the room for young people in K-12, and yet they weren't a formal part of the process. So, so the city has asked YPlan to help reconnect the dots on both the development of the site, but also thinking overall about the transportation needed to get young people and their families from where the Richmond High is in that community down to the South Shoreline. This project took place over 2 years, and what was learned the first year was really exciting to inform the second year, which I have described here. The first year, young people went out and did mapping and learned about the South Shoreline. The city manager was pretty humbled to find out kids had no idea where it was, what it was. It's actually a gorgeous space for them to spend time in, but no access to use of that space. And so when from the first year of YPlan, he said, you know what, we really have to integrate young people more formally and put Y-Plan into the formal bid for a transportation plan study for the following year. And that was a huge mark in terms of the authenticity of Y-Plan that not only became a nice thing that people do, but part of the city planning process, right? So when any of the firms want to bid on doing a transportation connectivity study, which gets planners pretty excited, I gotta tell you, they had to actually engage with young people, and they stipulated that Y-Plan was the process, the infrastructure, this program at Richmond High School to do that. So it became a formal part of how the city did planning. At the same time, what the school did was engage young people in doing a real survey, because now it was real work. This wasn't just a nice after-school activity, which whatever information they got would be helpful. So young people went out and collected, and the mentorship was a lot of the firm that now had to work with the young people, right? They were actually lovely and a really nice planning firm, and were excited to do this work, but it took a lot more time than they were expecting in terms of working with the young people. So the students in 2 classes went out and collected over 500 community surveys. The large majority were young people who the city never has access to insight from. And the data is certainly being used now by the city to really inform what they invest in for future transportation plans. And longer term, how can they connect the dots between the schools in Richmond and the large, hopefully, long-term redevelopment, economic development plan in Richmond through the Richmond Bay campus, right? So that's an example of how it really grew over the 2 years. I want to briefly explain the data or the insight that we're trying to collect according to this double bottom line. So first, we look at college and career preparation and readiness. And I got to say, it's so hard to find the right language, because some people hate 21st century learning, some people love Common Core. You know, the truth is that Y-Plan aligns with so much of the language of what we're trying to do in educational reform today. So we're framing it broadly as 21st century learning, but it absolutely in California aligns with secondary education reform of linked learning, which builds from school to career. Common Core across the country. If we're in Dallas, they don't like Common Core, so it's school to career there. We don't really care what you call it. It's about making learning rigorous and relevant. So we're trying to really look at how does Y-Plan support young people in meeting core academic requirements according to the 5 C's, which we'll go over very briefly. And then how does Y-Plan differ from other civic education processes? And then the other bottom line is really, what do adults learn? And how do adults learn in this process? And how does it impact their professional work, the planning practice, and the place? Will the city itself change? I'll show you a little bit of the data that we're collecting. Collaboration, critical thinking, 2 core parts of what we're trying to get young people to be engaged. And I know as college scientists, you do a lot of focus on this. So examples of collaboration, what we find in, these are early lessons, right, from Richmond and elsewhere, that real deadlines necessitate collaboration and teamwork to realize individual and group goals. It's really funny, you put real timeline on kids, you know, they engage in a very different way, as do adults, as do we with timelines. Critical thinking, again, everyone talks about wanting to have critical thinking more embedded, but you engage kids in place and thinking about the places they live. Critical thinking can go to a whole different level, right? Again, it connects to their sense of identity and a sense of the places they live, that their families live, and that they hopefully want to live in the future or improve. So some of the things we've been looking and finding is is the critical engagement and sustained engagement. So they come after school, you know, a real sense of persistence of engagement. That the process leads to further questioning and inquiry. We've actually changed, we're always adding things to Y-Plan. At the end isn't so much the proposals, which they all do, but what questions were raised. Because kids end up with so many questions at City Hall or the final presentations. So the notion is they really are generative learners and thinkers. That they evaluate and identify reliable information, that they can synthesize information. One quick tip is they have to come up with a title for their proposal. It's a great tool to make young people synthesize information very quickly. And it's fun. And it uses key evidence to support ideas, right? The survey that young people did, right, of why people do use transit or not, huge evidence, right? And it's real to their worlds. This is a quote from one of the young people, an example of part of the work. We do kind of a pre-post about what do you know about urban planning ahead of time, and then follow up with it to try to get a sense of the details that what young people learn over time. The three other C's that we are loosely framing right now for our work in looking at student outcomes is creativity and innovation, particularly the use of digital technology and mapping. There are increasing mapping tools that we're talking to Sarah and other folks with technology about developing further and integrating more into the Y plan process. Kids love mapping and kids love spatial data. It's so cool to see them just excited about data when it's around maps and seeing where they live and connecting dots to where they play, where they're supposed to be and not supposed to be. It's just a great way of engaging them, and they can use it with a lot of creativity and innovation. Communication is off the charts. I mean, young people become so confident in their ideas and what they want to share, whether it's a formal process at City Hall or every lesson where they have to do some form of communicating verbally or in writing. The fifth part is community contribution, and I know we could probably make our entire study just about civic engagement and community collaboration, but it is truly a huge thing to see adults and young people develop relationships. That trust, and Y plan has to take over, be implemented over a period of time, enough to allow relationships really to develop, so that trust is there, so young people feel their voices will be heard, and adults are honest about what they really want to learn from young people and have a sense of what they can learn from young people. So I'm just going to push through a little quickly because I want to save some time for dialogue. Really around the double bottom line of patterns and trends around communities and professionals. We're trying to figure out the right framing. Jessie has helped kind of frame this. She's very good with the 5 C's, the 3 P's, and whatever kind of helps you think about this work. The participants change themselves. The planning practices change, and this is what we're hearing and collecting the data on. And then the places themselves, whether it's a sidewalk crack or a bathroom that the kids had to tell the city manager hasn't worked in 5 years, right? Guess how quickly that bathroom worked at that rec center. When kids said this in public, you just didn't know, right? Boom, a week. It doesn't take that long to respond to some of these very basic needs. So a couple of details around how participants are changing, just thinking differently about the practice, how and for who we are planning for. The recognition of schools, not only young people, but the one institution that we have made responsible for helping them succeed, how schools should be actors in city planning and transformation. It challenges assumptions and disrupts negative stereotypes about young people, and I think that's huge. Young people are blamed for problems in cities so often. This really transforms that to young people being positive actors on community. The planning practice, and again, this is all kind of framed within practice theory, but the planning practice can change. The city manager has a great quote about this. The Y plan, again, he's been doing this for 5 years, and he's a busy guy, but really recognizes Y plan as a best practice model of public participation. At the last City Hall in the fall, Jessie had the great idea of actually, let's mark down, parents come. Parents filled City Hall. It was standing room only when young people presented these surveys that they did, right? Guess what else it was the first time City Hall was filled with? Families of color, right? Low-income families, families who feel very disinvested in the system, families who don't understand, who don't see their role, or don't believe that people will listen to their role. So it was really amazing. I think 72% of the adults there had never stepped foot in front of City Hall before they came to hear the young people present on their Y plan. So it really, community participation is a huge part of what we're supposed to do in city planning. So it's a huge tool to really change the planning practice. Informed engagement, not just engagement, but engaging with information and data, right? A huge opportunity and resource. And then it takes some time, but actually changing the places we live in, changing the transportation route, changing a sidewalk, perhaps on a sidewalk, changing things that we take for granted, that when you start to learn about looking at place differently, that change is possible. I think one of my favorite quotes from Bill Lindsay this year was that, you know, the ideas that young people come up with, they're a lot cheaper, they're a lot more affordable than a lot of the adult decisions. Why don't we act on these sooner? And he is really incorporating that into his work. So I want to conclude with this great website that John here is advising us on and developing. We would love, and you guys know so much more about this than we do, we love your insight. We'd be happy to share this website with you after. We're developing new tools on it all the time, as much as we can. We're going to tell more stories on it. That's what we're starting to do now to kind of make the process more approachable or more visible. And again, this is just examples of the toolkit which I showed you before. Challenges, my gosh, and going to growth is a huge challenge. And then this framing of, you know, how do we scale the lining for difference, but really retaining the kind of fidelity of the model, the core components of White Plan that we've spoken about today. We know there are great limits to generalizability and what's kind of framed as mastering variation. You know, we're trying to understand what balance is it where you kind of have to do the same core milestones, or you're doing a great project, it's not a White Plan project, so we can't really claim it. At the same time, New Orleans and Dallas and Washington, D.C. are certainly local contexts, and we have to adapt to those local contexts. And I just claim that, I just close with, one of the biggest things is measuring a moving target. So any insight you guys have about, you know, trying to measure these very organic, very natural types of work locally, would be welcome. I think we have at least 15 minutes or so for discussion. And I will conclude there. And again, just inviting everybody in May, if you're around, to Washington, D.C. to come meet the young people and adult allies doing White Plan around the country. So thank you. I'll never be able to talk for 45 minutes, right? Okay. Yes.
Could you say a bit more about the project in, how do you pronounce it, about doing in Indonesia?
Sure. There are a number of low-income housing communities. Our shanty towns are a little bit better because they have, you know, running water, they have some infrastructure. What happens in the rainy season and in natural occurrence of having very little businesses in the area, that they need to make them more vibrant places. So the city has said, you know, what are young people who are often the vast majority living in these housing communities, these housing settlements, what do they feel is really important, particularly around the issues of public space, because that's where young people live so often, right, and play and engage in the world. So they took on the challenge about what are the greatest impediments about using public space. And water and flooding and lack of control of the water is one of the biggest issues that young people face, and that the city knows. There's very little drainage often. So the young people are taking on that challenge to look at alternatives to the project. To be honest, they're going to come and present on their findings. I actually have a great PowerPoint that I can share if you're interested. I think it should be on our website soon. That kind of narrated the story of creating a pilot. And she's a graphic designer, so she did a lovely kind of presentation on the process of developing that on the project. I'd be happy to share with you. So that's kind of the overview of the project. Is there something more specific?
No, that's good, thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah. And just tell me your name and then what department, or you study math, or what do you study? What are you interested in?
I'm Ruby. I'm in the Maximum program, so I'm trained to be a science teacher at the secondary level. And I'm like so excited about this because I think when I came to Berkeley, part of the reason why was to be able to do interdisciplinary things and to think about urban planning in relation to like science education in particular. And a question that I have, and is like informed somewhat by trying to do some things, although not like extensive as White Plan, but like with like developing apps that they think are going to be relevant in their community, is like the follow through and the maintenance and that like kind of continued authenticity, because I feel like from what I saw there's like such an emphasis on that in the moment when like the students are still in the class, but like after, I'm just curious, like after a project has been accepted by the client, like how are those students able to continue being involved, or after they've developed an app like that requires constant maintenance and like to reach a critical mass of people, and just kind of more about how that works, and like how students continue to feel after they've left the class that that's still a part of their identity and a part of like what they contribute to their community.
So I would say science is a perfect discipline for this. That it's where we've done a lot of work on STED Phase 5, which is about now that you've gone public with your idea, so what? We're building up a lot of resources about young people's sustained engagement. In Richmond, they started a youth council to sustain young people's engagement. It's actually more of a watchdog that the young people really want. It was on a redevelopment project 2 years ago that the young people really wanted to make sure that something was happening and that their engagement would be sustained. So I think that's one way to really look at what are the civic opportunities. You can ask teachers to be the agents of that over time. So what we're really trying to do is to make sure that Phase 5 has enough resources that everybody kind of adds to too and locally, but that teachers aren't expected to do all that work, but you are expected to understand what are the networks that can connect young people to. The top line is college and career readiness. You know, this is the scientific method, engaging kids in this type of authentic, this type of inquiry. So it's also very much about helping young people say it's not just about creating a transit plan, right? It's very much about this process is what you're doing to prepare for college and making that very visible. So it's very important not just to be focused on community development, but making transparent that this is actually something that you can write in your college essay. In fact, one of the reflective activities that we suggest teachers do is to do a mock college essay for young people. It's often the first time they've written it, and it's really nice to try to write one before you're panicked and trying to submit an application, right? Again, how useful can everything be that you need that you're doing in this process? But does that answer your question that it's really about building out the resources and thinking about that at the beginning?
Yeah, I guess just as like a quick follow-up, have you ever had partners who like agree to hire on one of the students who was part of the plan? Because that seems to like a really nice.
And particularly with Link Learning here in California, that internships is a huge part for kids. I have to say that the city of Richmond hired 2 of the students as interns over the summer. In Richmond, you know, in Oakland last week, they told the Oakland city planners, oh, Richmond hired 2 people, so now they're trying to hire 2 people. Again, it's more of an anecdote than systems, but that is very, very important about this is, now that young people have relationships, it's a fantastic way to translate into internships, jobs, summer jobs, college careers. You can actually study city planning. Cool. So absolutely, it's important. Yeah.
So I'm Michael Randy still, but I'm really fascinated about the youth part because that's one market that Lee and I are hoping to get into big time, and we haven't so far. Like in addition to like power brokers, we also our market is not just old people in Berkeley, but like 17-year-olds in Mississippi, because they're the ones who are going to be living with more of the impacts of climate change, right? And it's a little frustrating because like I've gone to talk to a couple of groups, and the people on average are older than I am, and even the people who come to our website tend to skew toward the older side. And so I was really fascinated about the students from Tohoku, because one of the people we're working with, an undergraduate actually who's translating the script of our video into Japanese, we already have a good first draft. He actually went to Fukushima with a Geiger counter trying to figure out what was going on and was upset by it and so forth. And of course, one of the reasons that Fukushima exists at all is because Japan doesn't have much in the way of fossil fuels. And so they're really intimately tied into climate change and energy resources. And if they had better alternatives than nuclear, like giant, solar shield, then they wouldn't need it. So, I mean, I'm willing to volunteer to help. If you have 400 students who need me to talk to them in the summer, I'll talk to them.
Great. I was just saying July 22nd, they arrive. And honestly, that would be fantastic. There's also a teacher coming from Japan who's done similar work all outside of school. We're passionately committed to trying to get this inside of school.
Great.
A professor, actually in technology, would be fantastic, who actually does all community practice work, is trying to think about how to help translate this back in Japan. Into school. So that would be fantastic, especially if you have it translated. The kids could use it. They amazingly, Apple donates iPads to the kids who get these scholarships to come. So 100, thank God we're not doing 400 at a time. But there'll be 4 classes of Y Plan Studios going on. And again, it'll be the first 2 weeks is on a local community development project, but then they'll be translating that back at home. That sounds like a fabulous tool.
Also, I mean, I noticed that New Orleans and New York City is on your list, and of course, folks have been hit by Hurricane Katrina or Hurricane Sandy. Often, it's really the poorest people that are going to be most impacted by climate change that have already been impacted, like in the 9th Ward of New Orleans, and those that are in the future, whether it's Bangladesh or whatnot.
John, do you have his tool on our resources list yet? Have you done it yet? Okay, that's a great tool. No, but I need to put it into action. That is what we're trying to do is like share these expertise. We have so much information. The issue is how do we get into useful information in hands of folks that can, make sense of it. So I would love, that's a great idea. So I would love to do that. No? Is there another question? Okay. time for Seder, if anyone's going to a Seder.
Yeah.
Okay,
It's a
then-
6 o'clock.
Oh, we have till 6?
No, I mean the Seder doesn't start.
Oh, okay. Then I think I would just conclude with really inviting everybody. We would love you to participate, whether it's taking the class I taught for 12 years in my plan, or really we would love ideas and thought partners as we really go into this research side of the work. I also want to recognize Pat Clark, who's sitting back there. She's been a mentor of mine since I did my first ethnography practice in her classroom at Oakland Technical High School in the Health Academy. Back, what, 3 years ago? Or 20 years ago? But really in helping us go into this research side of data, especially on technology. So, you know, we're often, you know, might be hiring some, you know, small research assistants, whatever. So if you're interested, please let us know. Jessie is the national coordinator of LivePlan, our research specialist. Yeah, like a lot of people in this room are connected one way or the other. So please be a part of our community. We really love that. So thank you. It was great being back at Tolman.
Thank you, Deb.